Hey everyone, how are you doing? My name is Josh Prather. I'm a pastor at Redemption Church, and I'm here with Imam Didmar, Rabbi Jeremy from Temple Kolami and the United Islamic Center of Arizona. Together, we co-lead triads of pastors, imams, and rabbis in the city, and triads of lay leaders in the city to try to be a blessing to the city, to try to work together for the common good, but to try to hold to our convictions as different faiths. That's why we call it multi-faith work. And we're part of a national network called Multi-Faith Neighbors Network. So we thought it would be good for us in this time to have a multi-faith perspective of what's happening from the background of the Jewish community, of the Islamic community, and the Christian community, how we can encourage one another's people and one another's traditions, and how we can just have a moment of sharing what we all know and what we all need to hear at this time. So I'm going to first pass it to Rabbi Jeremy, and he could fill in any gaps, anything that I missed in his introduction, and he can share a little bit of encouragement from the Jewish perspective. So, Rabbi. Still muted, buddy.
I'm back. We are all worrying. If there was ever an example of what it means to the idea about what happens here affects people over there, we're living in that time. Through this pandemic, we see ourselves as all connected. There's no Chinese coronavirus victims or Italian victims or Iranian victims or American victims or Christian or Jewish or Muslim victims. We are just different persons and people from all over the world with the same fears, with the same uncertainty, with the same worry, and all with the same prayers for healing. And that makes us all human beings. Really nothing different than all of us except maybe age. So what I wanted to offer this afternoon was what I think would be helpful from our tradition is the power of prayer. Not to change God and not to change the course of the virus. I actually don't believe that faith. I believe that this is a natural evil. I don't think this is a punishment from God or within God's control. But I want to suggest and teach that just for a moment about the power of prayer, not to change God, like I said, but to change us. And this comes from a Jewish form of prayer called hit bodedut. That is a practice of self-secluded Jewish meditation, which just so happens we're all self-secluded in our homes. So that's why I thought this might be helpful. What this practice is an unstructured, spontaneous, individualized form of prayer and meditation through which each individual establishes a close, personal relationship with God through a free-flowing monologue. Where some people may go out into the woods and make a primal scream, Jews, for example, in this practice, go out into the woods and complain. Not just complain, but think and question and plead and wonder and acknowledge and unload without stopping to think or formulate our thoughts. We just talk to God. It's a stream of consciousness that takes some practice. But it can be extremely cathartic, and it can reveal some of the most remarkable inner thoughts and feelings. And so I recently heard a local therapist here in the Valley, Ashley Southard, actually. She shared some helpful coping mechanisms for our kids and ourselves who are cooped up in our houses. And she said, this is indeed a worrying and frightening time, and we should give voice to that. We should actually give voice to those feelings and those thoughts, our fears and our anxieties, and we should say them to our family members, and we should write them in journals, and we should express them through art. And I agree with all of that. And what I would add is that we also share them with God, not to change God and not to stop the virus, but to change ourselves. because we give ourselves insight and courage and patience and perspective and confidence and hope and calm, in gratitude in the prayers when we do that, when we find them deep in our souls. So let's use this time to talk to God, to cry to God, to be silent with God. It's all prayer, and I think it'll help. I think it's helping me, and I hope and pray that it helps all of you. So thank you for this opportunity to share.
Wow. I love that. I love the idea of meditation. Thank you for sharing that, because that's something I was going to share from the Christian tradition at this time. In isolation, a lot of us haven't had this much time alone. So I think it can be really challenging, whether we're Muslim, Jewish, or Christian, this much isolation, because in large part, it's not the way it's created to be. We're created for a relationship. You know, in the beginning, there's a world of peace. God is a God of peace, and that's all broken. And in the Christian tradition, obviously, we kind of go forward and we come to Jesus as the Prince of Peace. But I think there's hope for all of us in meditation, as Jeremy was saying, that as we're praying and we're seeking God, that God hears devout people that fear him and seek him. And I think that can be a comfort to us, as God wants to give peace. God is not a God of fear, and he doesn't hold back peace. God is generous, and God generously gives peace to those that seek after it, whether they're from whatever community they're from. And I'm thinking of a story where there's a man who is devout, feared God, and he's actually meditating. He's praying and he's seeking after God, and he's not from the Christian tradition or the Muslim tradition or the Jewish tradition. And God hears him and God speaks to him. And eventually in that story, God actually provides him with peace. So in a world right now where I think all of us at some level, myself included, are a bit fearful about what the future is going to hold, and there's also anxiety that's swirling around in our communities, especially for the extroverts out there, where this is really hard. Jeremy, this can be really challenging, being extroverted and just hungering to be with people. Especially for all religious leaders. But it's nice to know that God hears us when we seek him, and he offers peace to those that come after it. So that's my word of encouragement to our communities. Didmar, how about you?
Well, thank you, Josh, and thank you, Jeremy, for sharing those beautiful words from your traditions. These are definitely difficult times for all of us, for our communities in general, for the whole world, as a matter of fact. We're living times that we haven't lived before. Therefore, we have to evaluate the situation, and we have to also pay attention to be patient. And that's what I wanted to highlight here in these few words that I'm going to share with you all. Patience is a character of many prophets before. Patience is the character of the righteous people. Patience is something that gives a heavy price at the end. And when we reflect on our lives, we see that our lives from day one until we pass away is full of trials and tribulations. And in order for these trials and tribulations to be passed, we have to go through patience. If we don't have patience when we grow up, if we don't have patience when we study, if we don't have patience when we work until those hours they end, then how can we really be able to benefit from the fruits or the outcomes of those times? So we learn that in life, or let's say that God prepared us in such a way where we learn and we put it into practice patience on daily basis. And now that we're faced with this virus, we have to also recognize that according to our tradition, according to Islam, it is God the one who sends to the humans everything. And everything, as a matter of fact, is a test. So recognizing the fact that everything is a test, he does not necessarily wants the humans to fail that test. Just like a teacher, for example, would not wish for the student to fail the test that he gives, but through that test, he wants the student to get better and to get a good grade. and to be prepared for something big that is coming up later on, whatever life throws at him. So similarly, God too wants from the human, through these tests to get better. However, there are some humans, unfortunately, some individuals who fail these tests. There are humans who create chaos out of these tests. There are humans who use the opportunity and they benefit in ways that they should not benefit, and they just use the opportunity in a wrong way, like I said. And these are all, even though they may think that they are winning, but in reality they are failing miserably because they're taking advantage of the situation. And unfortunately, there's a lot of individuals or maybe even organizations in higher scale that may take advantage of the created situation. But however, I'll go back to mention that we are just being tested, and we have to pass this test through patience. In our tradition, again, there are many examples where God gives to Muslims, parables of those generations who were before them, and the more righteous the generation was, the more righteous the person was, the greater the reward is going to be. And in order to get to higher levels of paradise in the hereafter for the believers, there is no other way but to go through the struggles and to pass them successfully. So I pray for peace, I pray for patience, and I pray for safety for every single one of us.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. My encouragement to anybody who hears this is a few things. One, the beauty of multi-faith work and the work we're trying to do is because we're all human, there's something to learn from each tradition, which is why when Jeremy speaks or Didmar speaks, there's something that I can hear personally and I can learn from. And we actually carry that vision of meditation or pieces of that vision of meditation in the Christian tradition and patience. But there's also going to be things that you hear and I hear that we really disagree with. But that doesn't mean that we can't come together. And part of this work, and especially while you're in isolation, while you're being tested and being patient, while you're meditating or you're pursuing God, my encouragement is that you don't forget your neighbors. As you're praying, as you're meditating, as you're being tested, I'm remembering Jeremy, I'm remembering Didmar, and I'm remembering the neighbors that I'm connected to in my city and in my community, but also around the world, that we're just not totally isolated. Although we're in isolation, we're part of a network of humans that are around us, and we're also part of a world that is in big need right now, and they're in need of peace, patience, and hope in this time. So thanks for taking the opportunity to listen. This was Imam Didmar's idea for us to come together and have a response to this together from our different faith backgrounds, and we appreciate you. Have a good day.
Josh and Didmar, I want to add to what you said, because you said so well that perhaps the expression that we should be socially distancing from people is incorrect, and that we should be physically distancing from ourselves, but socially connecting, which is, I think, what we've modeled here, that just because we're isolated doesn't mean that we can't connect. And I hope that even with just the people we agree with, but also with people beyond those we agree with, our neighbors and of other traditions. And so I want to wish you a happy Easter, and Didmar a blessed Ramadan as we're about to celebrate Passover, and many blessings on each of your families and your traditions.
Good, Jeremy, I appreciate you saying that. Didmar, do you have any last words before we stop? You're still
you're mute.
On mute.
You're muted.
The dreaded
I
mute.
just pray that this message reaches in peace to every single person.
Amen.
Okay. All right. Well, here's the final goodbye. Thank you all for listening.